Hey guys, welcome to another video on A-level Biology P5, and this will be a new video on this topic after quite a while, and it will also be very interesting in the aspect that the past paper I will be walking you through the question number 2 of that past paper, which I will be walking you through is the one I actually did because this was the year I appeared for my CIEs, right? And I found that question number 1 was quite okay, quite generic, quite average. It was question number 2 that posed me quite a few problems. Some problems that were a bit new, some that were old. The majority of them which were old and largely repeated. Meaning they were the sort or the genre of problems that a average candidate, an average candidate, I mean any candidate might experience or in a similar question worded slightly differently, certain key terms, certain key ideas that you just need to try and kind of incorporate. There were the such problems, but ones I didn't have problem with because I had successfully trained myself not to fall into that trap. So I'll be discussing question number 2 because that was perhaps the more difficult one for most people, certainly for me. So this is A-level biology, paper 5, summer 2018, 52. That is A-level biology and the year I appeared in. So basically we started with this. Red deers are herbivores that are common in the highlands of Scotland, right? So they're herbivores and they're common in this particular region. They do not have any natural predators, right? And so in some areas, culling of the deer is carried out in order to manage their numbers and maintain the species diversity of the ecosystem. So point one, whenever you're doing a P5 or literally any other question in whatever subject, underline stuff that you might think can be of import later on. Over here, what is the cause and the effect? There aren't any predators, so people have to cull the animals, right? Because there isn't any natural way of controlling their numbers for whatever reason, so people have to cull them so that their numbers are maintained and to maintain diversity. Now, the one first mistake I did, which I later did rectify, but was still a sort of headache, was that I did not underline this part because I was like, species diversity, okay, I get that. We don't want too much of this, so there'd be too little of other thing. But the thing was that this was actually a bit more. The species diversity is an actual concept, and a concept that was changed when I actually began to study A2 because previously I didn't think too much about it. To me, species diversity was that there should be a lot of different species, right? That is what I got from it, and I was keeping that layman idea in mind, and I didn't initially underline it or think too much on what it actually is, even though we have studied species diversity in a lot of detail. Anyways, I'll be coming back to this. So manage their numbers and maintain diversity. Anyways, a group of scientists, they basically read a report which suggested that allowing sheep to graze alongside deer might significantly reduce the need to cull the deer. So this is just a hypothesis, right? That if sheep were allowed to graze in the same area that there was a red deer population, this would somehow manage their numbers, and so we wouldn't have any need to cull them in order to reduce their numbers. This was a hypothesis, something that needed to be tested out. Now they decided to carry out a survey to investigate the number of deer found grazing at 16 different sites. Right? So this was the number of sites, and if you talk about the distribution, in 8 sites there were deer and sheep, but in 8 others there were deer but there weren't any sheep. So one is the control, the other is the experiment. Each site was visited during the first week of April and the first week of July in 2007, and then again in 2009. So there was basically an interval of 2 years to see if there would have been any change in that time period. And the same time of year was taken so that any other factor like seasonal distribution, seasonal migration would automatically be taken account of. So the dimensions are given, and within each site, the amount of area that is allocated and selected at random for analysis purposes is given out as 10 into 10 meter study plots, 1 into 10 meter strips. And basically, this study plots within each site, they were selected at random, and this is a good procedure. And the area within each site, basically this circumference over here, and this is what a single study plot looks like. So far, so good. Now, how could a method the students could have to select the study plots randomly? This is actually something that is written in the more popular books, the use of a number generator or some sort of an app to give out random coordinates which could be demarcated. Easy 2 marks. Now, they've basically said that the way they will be investigating are sort of like giving an estimate of the population of deer and the population of sheep, because they were basically giving a change over time interval. So they needed to know what the population of deer was or what the population of sheep was, right? And they had to do that. The method they chosen was dung counting to give an estimate of the number of deer and the sheep present. So now the first question was suggest why counting the dung may not provide an accurate estimate of deer or sheep number. And I read this and I was like, wow, this does not seem to be a reliable method at all. It seems to be so, there can be so many pitfalls. And I was like, what? Why would someone do that? Like, so many things could go wrong. And I was like, okay, let me just write one thing that could go wrong. And I was clueless. I couldn't quite get somewhere. I was like thinking in different directions. And there was an actual reason that was coming up, not one I could actually put into words. And like I wasted 2 minutes, but then I quickly realized this is just a 1 mark question. I can get back to this. I don't need to waste valuable time on this. And this is one pitfall in my technique that I stopped myself from falling into. So I was like, I'll do this later. I'll probably come up with it. My subconscious mind will be thinking about this after all. And I was right. So this was one way in which my technique was good. I'd learned from previous experience not to waste time. Right, so next was two variables that were standardized. This is easy. For example, the season in which the counts were done, or actually more specifically, the time of the year in which the counts were made, because they were made in the same months in 2 different years. And secondly, the dimensions of the plot and the dimensions of the study plot, they were the same, they were standardized. Again, this is an easy question, but in these easy questions you need to be specific. I was like, the dimensions were the same, or the area was the same, area in which the counts were in was the same. You might lose at 1 mark. So you're not being specific enough. What area? The dimensions were one, and of what? The area the count was being taken in. There was a hierarchy. There was an area, there were study plots, and then there were the demarcations. You can just go with the dimensions of the study plot were the same, right? You're being specific. You're using the term that was given, the study plots. And same with the they were taken at the same time. I would use something very non-specific. The counts were taken at the same time. I wouldn't be conveying my meaning, but I'm being more specific when I was saying that the time of the year is the same, or the months in which the counts were made were the same in the 2 successive years. I am being specific and I'm not losing myself to easy marks. This is another pitfall I did not fall into, nor should you. Now, this was the interesting and the difficult question. So the scientist also counted the number of plant species present within each 16 site, and what, again, use underlying method. The number of plant species. So this is the mean dung count against the number of plant species. Now what this seems to suggest is that when the dung count increases, the number of plant species decreases. Now, that appears to be with the hypothesis that somehow maintaining the number of red deer, that is, reducing their dung count, would somehow help in maintaining species diversity. That was it, the two goals: maintain the red deer population and maintain species diversity. That seems to have an underlying assumption that if the deer population is controlled, the diversity of other species, of all the species, will be great. That was an underlying assumption that was previously unquestioned in this over here. And if you're being not taking too closely, you would think that this graph is doing the same. It's some proving that it would be the case. But one thing is that species diversity does not necessarily mean the number of species. There are two parameters: the number of species and the distribution. If we have like a lot of different species, 30, and one of them is predominant, the species diversity is not great. There have to be even distribution. There have to be a significant number of each species in an area for there to be a good species diversity. So this is not necessarily supporting that. And in the next question, you can write this, because the next question is basically about you have to prove why the results in 2.2 and 3 do not support the suggestion that allowing the sheep to graze alongside the deer would significantly reduce the need to cull the deer. For one, we don't have any, even the assumption that there is a correlation between species diversity and controlled red deer population, even that isn't concrete. We don't have a concrete idea, we don't have concrete proof that there is a correlation, or and certainly not a causation. Even if there was a correlation, certainly not a causation. This can be a second point. What we are seeing from these graphs are correlation, not causations, not cause effect relationships. And then if you were to see the mean deer dung count, if there is a maintenance of red deer population, a decrease with the introduction of sheep. Apparently there is, because there's a bit of a difference, quite a bit of a difference in the mean. But even this does not mean anything, and that was not this was not something I fell into because of the range. The range is overlapping so much that these results are largely insignificant. Secondly, we are just have graphical data. We have no statistical analysis of this, no t-test, no application of the mean, if the mean means anything. From the graph you can say most likely does not mean anything because of the overlap, but without any statistical test of the mean, we don't have 100% concrete thing that this does not mean anything. This statistic one was also something that I forgot and I remembered late, just as I was about to hand my paper in. So I will repeat: even in daily life, do not be fooled by anecdotal data, anecdotal proofs, even graphical things, or even raw data that has not been statistically analyzed, even if it appears to say something or that something is in a particular direction. Until it has been statistically analyzed, more importantly, if the data that is given is accurate, you also have to see if the way that the data is determined, was the method an accurate one, how much error does it account for. Only then can you take something at face value. So I'm hoping that this was an enlightening experience. If it was, please like and subscribe and leave a comment. I think a few people, a couple of them, were interested in this. And if they do see this, I would like to see what they have to say about this and what sort of problems they might be facing regarding the upcoming P5. Thank you.